All right, what's up, social media world? For those of you just joining us, welcome to the Southern Four-Wheel Drive Association TechNet. So this is our Level 3 TechNets. If you missed the first two, you can go back on Southern Four-Wheel Drive Association's page and look at the two previous TechNets. Originally, I was going to talk about recovery gear tonight, but some of you reached out and asked if I could talk more about, some of you said lockers, some of you said differentials, some of you wanted me to talk about limited slips and trash control. So we're going to talk about it all. We're going to talk about trash control and different trash control systems. So tonight we are going to talk about um, lockers, limited slips, trash control, A-track, brake lock differential, all the different types of trash control and kind of how it works and what it necessarily means. So as we are going through tonight uh, and kind of working our way through this, hopefully I'll be putting out some information that helps you guys. But if you have questions, post them down in the comments, preface it with a Q and then a dash in your question. That way, as I scroll through the comments, because I'm kind of doing this all by myself, you see me looking over to the side of the computer here, but preface it with that Q so I know it's a question and I'll do my best to answer it as soon as possible. Couple of things to talk about right here. So we are coming up very quickly on Trail Fest. You've all signed up, right? Nod your head. Yes, we signed up for Trail Fest and we are ready to have a blast. So Trail Fest this year at Uwharrie, North Carolina. We are super excited to be there for our second year. And this will be the last year it's at Uwharrie before it moves again. So again, super excited about that. Last year was a blast. We look forward to some good trail rides, both in the National Forest as well as on some of the private parks there, right? So really excited about that. The raffle is going to be awesome. My wife, Sarah, the business director for Southern Four-Wheel Drive Association, is working as hard as she can to get raffle items. I know we've got four-way tire inflation system from Moreflate. I know we got some stuff from Midland Radios. We've got some stuff coming in from Warren. We also, most importantly, we have not one, but two sets of tires from BF Goodrich. Okay. Not one tire, not two tires, not three tires, not even four tires. It is five tires, a full set, four tires and a spare up to 37 inches, KM3s or KO2s. So they have given us 10 tires to give away at the raffle. And I heard from a little birdie there's a good chance to win this year if you buy enough raffle tickets. Um, so super excited about that. So just checking here, seeing what everybody said. Hey Tim, heard Riding for a Social's Child did a fantastic job this year. A lot of great reviews back from that event, and hopefully it worked out well for you guys. Hey Norman, hey Dan, hey yeah, definitely recovery is one of the favorite topics. But as I was saying earlier, we had a lot of people ask for trash control. So maybe the next one I can get into recovery some more, and I may do a whole series on recovery. Hey Nicole. All right, let's jump right into it because this is one that can get a little long-winded as we talk about trash control systems. Hey Esther. So in order to talk about trash control systems, I think it's important to understand why we need different types of trash controls on the trail. Well, the reason being is I've got two little RCs here for different reasons, but when we are in four-wheel drive, right? Four-wheel drive high range or four-wheel drive low range, and in our full-time vehicles, our center differential is locked. We split the power to the front and rear of the vehicle, right? So the front's getting power and the rear is getting power. But we have a differential on the front and rear of the vehicle. Some people call it a pumpkin, a hogshead. For today's purposes, we're going to call it a differential, right? What that differential does very simply, right? We're not going to worry about how it does it, but very simply, it differentiates power left to right, okay? And it differentiates that power based on resistance, okay? That resistance could come in the form of many, many different things, okay? Could mean that our suspension is flexed out and we got a tire in the air, okay? So one tire has more resistance than the other on the front and rear. So it always sends the path of power, the path of least resistance. So really, when we are in four-wheel drive, okay, we only have two-wheel drive. One tire in the front could spin and one tire in the rear could spin. If these two tires were in mud and these two tires were on pavement, the path of power would be to these two tires. Okay, that's super simplistic as far as kind of talking about differentials and what they do. Okay, and all of our four-wheel drive vehicles, all of our vehicles that go on the road have a front and rear differential. Okay, the reason for the differential is because when we are driving and we turn, okay, we turn our vehicles, all four tires follow a different path. Okay, they travel different distances when we're turning. So they have to turn at different rates of speed. That's where the differential comes in. If they didn't turn at different rates of speed, then a tire would drag or spin on pavement and it cause excessive wear and tear on our vehicles. Okay, so that's what the differential does. Again, don't really worry too much about how it does it. A great trainer friend of mine who was a great mentor to me used to say, he'd tell everybody a lot of magic happens inside these differentials. So we're not going to worry about too much how it does it. More we're going to talk about how we overcome this, right? Yeah, Jason, welded diffs. That's right. So we'll talk about that. But let's figure out what these traction control systems are, and then we can kind of start talking about how they work. Now, modern vehicles, okay, take your 2012 up JKs, JLs, JTs, and your Toyotas with A-Track and stuff like that, they all have what we call electronic traction control, okay? I don't mean the little button or the little light that's a vehicle with squiggly marks behind it. That's on-road traction control. We're specifically talking about off-road traction control, okay? So off-road traction control, it's electronic, okay? Basically what it does is it senses which tires are spinning and it brakes those tires, okay? Now that's electronic traction control. There are other types of traction control that can happen right inside the differential, okay? It could be what we call a limited slip, where it, exactly like the name says, it limits the slip inside that differential that's happening, and it transfers the power from the tire that's spinning to the tire that has traction. We can also have lockers, okay? Now there can be two different types of lockers. There's what we call selectable and non-selectable lockers, okay? Non-selectable lockers like lunchbox lockers, Detroit or Eaton lockers, or as Jason Nichols said, welded differentials. These are what we consider non-selectable lockers. They lock up and they'll do it on their own. We can't choose when they lock or when they don't. Selectable lockers can be a couple of different ones as well. Air actuated, they can be electronically actuated, or they can even be cable or hydraulic actuated. So there's different types of lockers, and we'll talk about the kind of the pros and cons of each one. But let's talk a little bit about how our vehicle reacts in different terrain, right? Okay, so, or how our electronic traction control works, because that's a popular one. Now, some vehicles like Toyotas, or there's a few others out there, we have to actively turn the traction control on. So like Toyotas will have a button that'll say A-Track, and we have to hit that button, and it turns the traction control on for us. Or we turn it off to cancel out the traction control. We turn it off. Other vehicles like the new Jeeps, the new Wranglers, or any 2011 or 2012 Jeep and up, you can't turn the traction control off. It's always on. And they call that the brake lock differential. Again, this isn't the little light that comes on your dash with the vehicle with the squiggly marks. So what electronic traction control does, okay, you've got a wheel speed sensor at each hub, okay? Basically, it's counting rotations of the tire versus rotations of the other tire. This is like an ABS sensor or a wheel speed sensor. It's counting a tone ring in there. It's sending information back about braking and how much tire is turning more than another tire, all types of different things. But for this specific purpose, what it's counting is how many more rotations this tire, for instance, is having than this tire. And if it senses on the front and rear of the vehicle in four-wheel drive that this tire and this tire are spinning more than this tire and this tire, okay, or it could be diagonal, it's going to apply brake pressure to these two tires so that now it's tricking this differential into thinking the path least resistance is to these tires over here that have good traction. Okay, and it does it all electronically. And surprisingly, it does it very, very fast, right? Does it very quickly. And it very efficiently, okay? Especially the newer systems like Jeep's brake lock differential happens so fast, most of us don't even recognize it, okay? Now, Jeeps aren't even that loud when the traction control is working, whereas Toyota's A-Track is very loud. Sounds almost like you're grinding gears, right? So it's doing that. It does it very quickly and efficiently to always transfer the power back and forth between whichever tires have the best traction. This can help out a ton in mud as we're moving along through mud or really slippery surfaces, okay? The traction is changing consistently, right? Traction's changing very quickly between the tires. That way, it's always finding the best traction and then taking power away from the tires that are spinning. The key to electronic traction control, okay, and this is super important because again, it's an electronic process and vehicles or a computer is only as good as its input, right? The key to electronic traction control is a smooth, consistent throttle, okay? Now, brands, as far as vehicle brands, their traction controls do work a little bit different, but they all want a smooth throttle. If we are constantly on and off the throttle, the traction control will never have a chance to catch on. It's never going to do very well. It's always going to be trying to play catch up, and it can't really understand, you know, how the tires are reacting. So we have to keep a consistent throttle. Some vehicles, okay, some vehicles like you to keep it consistent and not change the RPMs whatsoever, right? Like Toyota A-Track, it likes a little bit higher RPMs, but keeping those RPMs consistent, right? The RPMs, the RPMs on your dashboard, or RPMs. The other, like Jeep's brake lock differential, actually likes for you to gradually, ever so slowly, increase the RPMs, right? Not removing them, but increasing those RPMs gradually until you feel the vehicle start to move, and then we can keep consistent RPMs. Now that doesn't mean, right, go from 0 to 10 right away. We're not going from, you know, 500 or 800 RPMs up to 2,000. No, we don't quite want to hit that point. What we do want to have is a gradual increase until we feel the vehicle start moving. There is too much RPMs, right? We can get too much RPMs, and the traction control cannot physically break that tire, okay? So we want to keep our RPMs under control. And again, all different vehicle manufacturers, they kind of work a little bit of a different way. So keep that in mind kind of as you're working with traction control. And again, the key to it is we have to let it spin a little bit. We have to let it eat a little bit for it to kind of go back and forth. Where you'll hear a lot of people say, traction control doesn't work that great, or hey, my traction control really doesn't work. But the reason is, again, we're conditioned as drivers from driving on road, not off road. We're conditioned as drivers. The second we feel a bump, a pothole, a curb, any type of tire spin, to release that throttle. Okay, but off-road, we've got to overcome that conditioning to keep that throttle consistent. If we hit the rock or the ledge or whatever we're trying to get up and over, and we release that throttle, even if we re-engage it, that traction control's got to catch up all over again. Okay, so we have to let those tires spin a little bit. Keeping that throttle set and keeping it consistent is super important. Traction control, again, works very well in really slippery type terrains. Okay, because and we'll learn why lockers could hurt us in these situations, because one tire is spinning on the front and one tire is spinning on the rear. Okay, one on the front and one on the rear. The other tire is not, which holds us in position on our line on slippery terrain. Gives us a lot more control. Typically, all four tires don't spin, right? So that's where traction control helps out a lot, and does a really great job off-road. Now, trusting in the traction control, right, is very important too, because we kind of have to understand that it's a computer process and we have to believe in it a little bit. But it is a really good process, and you know, on newer Jeeps, a lot of us drive them and don't even realize that it's happening. Toyotas, it's a little louder, so we do realize it's happening. Now, this is different, okay, from your what I call off-road cruise control, but like crawl control or Jeep Select Track or Select Drive. Ford has it now too. I think even Land Rover has it, where it's actually setting the throttle for you and keeping it at a desired speed. That's different, right? We're talking about traction control. So let's look a little bit at a different one I have here, because we'll kind of be able to see a little bit. Okay, I've got this one here, a little bit bigger. Okay, notice my front tires here. If I have good traction on this tire and this tire over here is just spinning, basically what the brake or the traction control is going to do is it's going to gradually clamp down on this until it slows it down enough so that the power goes over here. All the while, it's doing it on the rear axle too, right? It's doing it on the front and the rear axle. So that's electronic traction control. Hey, Jason, I think let's see here. Yep. Talking about your 2014 Tundra. When it slid down an icy hill, traction control cycled the brakes and kept the Toyota pointed where I want it. Yeah. The A-track started and the brakes on the back tire to straighten me out. Yeah, so with Toyotas, it can even work. It works in conjunction with like hill descent control and how we throttle and stuff like that to help keep us straight. And it does a really good job of that versus the next step that we're going to talk about, which is lockers, right? All right. So thank you for sharing that, Jason. Hey, James. So let's talk about lockers, because this is pretty common now, right? We're starting to see vehicles. Jeep's been doing it for a long time with the Rubicon. Ford Broncos now, you can get it. Toyota does it. Even Nissan does it. But we can get what we call factory lockers. Okay, now most of these are selectable lockers, but the same still kind of holds true for non-selectable lockers that engage and disengage based on how they kind of want to, right? For really simplistic terms. But what a locker does, they engage inside the differentials, locking those differentials in. So now they send equal power left to right all the time, right? All the time. It does not allow that differential to differentiate power. It doesn't matter what type of locker it is, whether it's selectable or non-selectable, air, cable, hydraulic, electric, that's what it does, right? What can change is how they engage, okay, and how long they take to engage, or whether we want them to engage or not. If we are using non-selectable lockers like welded diffs, Detroits, Eatons, what they do is they engage when they sense any slippage, okay? And sometimes we may want slippage, but they engage anyway. We're doing a tight switchback turn, or you know, we're trying to maneuver through some rocks and stuff, and they'll immediately engage. Now, these type of non-selectable lockers aren't as common anymore. We're not seeing them as much. you know, because again, most people are going with selectable with modern day on vehicles that they're driving on the road a lot. These a lot of times are reserved for not your daily driver or for more kind of dedicated trail vehicles. Some people still run them on the road, but it does take some finesse when you're driving on the road. Hey, Carson. So selectable, right, with cable, hydraulic, uh, air, and electric, the two most common being air and electric. They even engage a little bit different. Let's take air lockers, for example. ARB air lockers are a very common one that have been around a long time. Yukon now has their own air locker. They have their own e-locker too. But air lockers, what they do is they send a air pressure to the differentials and engage a mechanism inside the locker that basically locks that differential in place. Air lockers engage almost instantaneously and disengage almost instantaneously, right? And you can do it while you're driving. I mean, that's what they use on Ultra 4 buggies. That's what they use on really hardcore rock bouncers and stuff like that, because they Ultra 4 buggy can be ripping through the desert all of a sudden in these lockers and click them on and they're going to engage, right? Super strong, super quick, positive engagement, right? And they, again, they've been around a long time. They also, right, are air lockers because it's air pressure. This is a huge positive to air lockers, right? If something happens and something breaks, an air locker, specifically ARB air lockers, default to open. So if you're on the trails and something happens and you break something inside your differential, they will default to open, making it a much more pleasant ride on the way home. Okay, especially if you're driving it on the road. E-lockers, on the other hand, which is what we're seeing from OEM manufacturers, they are getting more common being installed and stuff. They're normally a little cheaper to install because you don't need an air compressor. On the other hand, normally are slower to engage. They're not always instantaneous, and they're a little slower to disengage because the bind up in the differential has to be released in order for them to engage. So you have to do what I call the e-locker wiggle, where when you go to engage them, you drive forward, back and forth, cause a little differential action, or back up, back and forth to cause a little differential action when you go to engage them and disengage them to get them to pop off. Normally when they're newer, they are very fast to engage and disengage, but when they get some life on them and some mileage on them, they take a little bit longer. For instance, on my 1999 Toyota Land Cruiser, my rear locker is a factory rear e-locker, Toyota factory rear e-locker, but my front is an air locker. Normally, to get my rear locker to engage, it takes roughly 20 to 30 seconds, sometimes even longer, to get it to work, and I have to drive back and forth to get it to engage. So that's the differences in kind of in those lockers. That's why selectable lockers, I normally push people to selectable lockers because, and specifically air lockers, because we want to be able to turn those on and off as needed. Yeah, they're not as cheap as the others, but less trail damage, less wear and tear on the vehicle, and it's much nicer to drive on the road, right? If we have a non-selectable locker and every time we turn on the trail, those inside tires are digging ruts and digging holes and tearing the trail up, which again, trail damage a lot of times is the leading cause for having to shut down trails. Now, when do we want to use lockers and when do we not want to use lockers? Okay, this is a huge argument. And again, this is, you know, kind of 80-20 rule. 80% of the time, this is the way it goes. There's 20% of the time where different circumstances come into play. I typically tell people lockers are not going to help you when there's no traction to gain anywhere. For instance, when you are buried in the mud, right? All four tires are on some type of slippery surface, icy surface, snow surface, mud. Lockers are not going to help you because there's no traction to find anyway, right? That's where traction control can help out a lot. Okay, traction control can really help out a lot. The benefit to lockers, though, is they don't really have to spin. But traction control normally is going to kind of search around as if you scroll back up. I'm going to throw up Jason's comment here where he's talking about his A-track and how it allowed him to stay straight in the snow. If you go on our Facebook page, Morrison's Outdoor Adventures, and you go and watch the white Gladiator coming up the snowy slope, if he had turned his lockers on, his truck on an off camber would have slid off the line, right? Because all 4 tires spin with lockers on. But because with trash control, one tire doesn't spin on each axle and the other side does, and it alternates back and forth based on the tire that has the best traction, it was able to stick its line and not slide off that line, right? So that's where the huge benefit is, again, to like trash control or something like that. So when do lockers really help us? Again, situationally dependent. I'm not saying that this is 100% of the time. Normally, lockers help us really the most when we're experiencing a loss of traction due to suspension flex. Okay, that's the most common. If we have a loss of traction because of a tire in the air or just doesn't have enough pressure down on the ground, a lot of time in rocks or things like that, lockers can help us. So that's when we want to use them. But turn them on, use them, and then immediately turn them back off again. There's some schools out there, okay, even some vehicle-specific schools that are teaching turn your lockers on and leave them on all day long. No, this is bad. Again, it's a lot of trail damage, but we're getting a lot more wear and tear on the drivetrain of the vehicle, okay? There's a lot more bind up, a lot more stress on CV axles or U-joints and the rotational parts in there. There's also a lot more wear and tear on you as a driver because you're having to do a lot more fighting against the steering wheel to turn and such. So that's where we really, really, really want to make sure we're turning those lockers on when we need them and turning them off when we don't. Normally, even in slippery terrain, if I come to a point where I'm really stuck, as long as there's not a chance of me sliding sideways off of the trail, right, onto a slope or into a tree or something, I may try my lockers if I'm having no other forward progression or having some issues. But normally, they're not going to help me in that situation, especially in snow and ice. I always laugh. You'll see somebody in snow and ice, and they post up on a Facebook page and they say, I'm stuck I slid off the road. And somebody's like, well, did you turn your locker on? It's not going to help you, dude. Not going to help you at all. So, all right, that's lockers. Okay, that's specifically lockers. And before I kind of go on to talk a little bit about a couple other situations where we never want to use lockers, I want to share some things. So I just threw it up on the screen right there, guys. Trail Fest, right? If you haven't signed up for Trail Fest, go ahead and do it, right? You're missing out. We're going to have some awesome trail rides, a great time out on the trails, and there's an amazing raffle, okay? Our sponsors, Moreflate, Midland, BFG, Warren, just to name a few, right? Just to name a few. There are tons of other sponsors, Rhino USA, and I know some of the shops like Wheats Off-Road and those guys may possibly be there, but normally they sponsor some stuff too. The great shops that support Southern Four-Wheel Drive Association are business members. They always support these events. So if you want in on probably one of the best raffles at any event out there, come to Trail Fest. Dixie Run also has a great raffle, and it's all thanks to our business members. Guys, I can't stress this enough. I ask you this every live stream. Send a message to our business members like Wheats Off-Road, Asheville Vehicle Outfitters, Falcon Expeditions, Midland Radios, Carta Tracks, all of our business members, right? Thank them for being a part of Southern. Their funds and everything are going directly back into the legal battles on the Daniel Boone Backcountry Byway, our grant programs, and all kinds of stuff. We can't do this without our business members, and most importantly, we can't do it without you guys, our members. So definitely a huge thank you to you guys for that. But come to Trail Fest, guys. These events are our biggest fundraisers to raise money for our grant programs and everything. So, all right, moving on, right? Moving on. Oh, and if you're interested in becoming a business member of Southern, reach out to my wife, Sarah Morrison, and she will get you set up as a business member, or if you know somebody that is. If you are interested in becoming a member of Southern Four-Wheel Drive Association, just a personal member or your club, reach out to Randy Lynn Rosa, and she will help you get set up with your membership. All right, moving on. So, talking about lockers, sometimes I don't use lockers just because there's kind of a danger factor in play. Anytime that I am off camber, I make sure my lockers are turned off, even if I have great traction. Because if for any reason, okay, let's say this vehicle right here was on a side slope driving along, boom, 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 boom. If this rear broke traction, both tires would spin if the locker's engaged. The rear would slide down. Now, best case scenario, I end up facing uphill and I have to recover. Not too bad, right? Not too bad, unless it hits a rut and it could cause the vehicle to roll over. If I have a front locker engaged, okay, or maybe I have a non-selectable lunchbox locker or something in the front. If it starts to spin, both tires spin with the locker engaged, the front would slide and point down the hill, or it could hit a rut, stump, or rock, and it could pitch the vehicle over. If I have both lockers engaged, right, all four tires are going to spin and they're going to slide down, and we're going to catch something eventually, and the vehicle could flop on its side. This is super common on off cambers, right? Especially if we have things like the sway bar disconnected and such. So that's why I really recommend on off cambers not having your lockers turned on. Normally too, and again, this one's definitely an 80-20 rule because there are some hill climbs that have to have lockers used, but a lot of hill climbs, I don't use my lockers at all my first attempt, okay? Number one, I want to see how the vehicle is going to react as I start to climb up. I want it very stable on that hill climb. Hill descents, the same thing, right? And normally on hill descents, I never use lockers. But on hill climbs, sometimes I'll make sure the lockers are off or don't engage them. I'll attempt the hill climb. If I fail it, I back down. And if I think lockers will help, I'll engage them. But now I know how the vehicle will react, whether or not it's going to want to pitch one way or the other or slide on the hill. And I'll use that to manipulate the vehicle how I need to with the lockers engaged. So those are two scenarios that right off the bat, I'm really hesitant to use lockers. Snow and ice, okay? Typically do not use lockers in that as well, just because I want that vehicle to remain stable where I'm at. Lockers, if all four tires are on ice, now all four tires are going to spin, right? One that's very common, a very common mistake I see is sand, right? Now, there's two types, okay? Yeah, your high-speed dune running and stuff like that, maybe you would use a locker in certain situations there, but mostly here on the East Coast, again, we're Southern Four-Wheel Drive Association here on the East Coast, we typically are not doing any high-speed dune driving. But we have a lot of beach driving like here in North Carolina, down towards the coast. But even some soft sand areas, we don't want to use lockers because what will happen is as this vehicle's turning, this inside tire is going to dig down, right? And as it's digging down, eventually we start to drag, and now there's more resistance and we can bury the vehicle very quickly. So we don't use lockers in sand. This is another time that trash control really works. You notice when all these companies are really showing off how well their trash control works, they normally do it in sand or some type of media that's similar, like loose pea gravel and stuff like that. That's because the trash control works very efficiently, right? So that's another situation where you wouldn't want to use the trash control. Make sure I don't have any questions again. And guys, again, if you've got a question, make sure that you preface it with a Q and a dash. So as I scroll through here, go ahead and preface it with that Q so I can see it real quickly. Esther, for older Jeeps that don't have traction control, we can use lockers. Depends on the situation, Esther. There's still situations where I would not use lockers. Sand and snow and ice and stuff like that. We're going to talk about here in a minute, but you already know, right? Some left foot braking can help. I'll try lockers as long as there's not a chance of the vehicle sliding into a precarious situation, right? So off cambers, I don't use lockers at all because I don't want it sliding off that off camber sand. I'm not going to use lockers. Sometimes in snow, but definitely not on ice. Sometimes in mud, it can help a little bit to help clear the tires by getting them to spin a little bit. Um, so older Jeeps that don't have traction control, sometimes I'll test and play around with lockers a little bit more liberally, so to speak, but I'm still kind of careful with it. Nicole, could you cover the downhill ascent control in Toyotas? Sure, because it's kind of the same for all vehicles. Um, so downhill descent control is a function of traction control. It's using the same process, right? Whether it's downhill descent control, crawl control in the newer Toyotas, or with Jeeps, their old downhill descent control, or their new select drive or select track. What downhill descent control does is the same thing, except it uses that same process, the wheel speed sensor at each tire, to keep the vehicle at a set speed as it goes downhill. And it's braking, excuse me, tires individually. Let me get a drink of water here. Right? So that we don't ever lock a tire up with downhill descent control. That way we don't ever induce a skid. Even if it locks one tire up, the other tire's still rolling in the front, so we can still get some steering out of it, and it'll quickly trade back and forth. Now, we can downhill descent control still driver input, right? So with Toyota, I know with like the crawl control downhill descent, you can adjust the speed by reaching up and changing the dial knob. The older ones, I can't remember about upshifting or downshifting, but you may have to change the speed, right, if it's extremely slippery terrain. Jeeps, on the other hand, are controlled when they're in downhill descent control. We're controlling their speed by actively upshifting and downshifting the transmission shifter in sport shift mode. I don't know specifically Toyota's I had to read that real fast. Specifically with Toyota, I don't know the specific speed with the downhill descent control, but with the Jeeps, I believe in first gear it's 0.6 miles an hour, second gear is 1.2 miles per hour, third gear is 1.8 miles per hour. It goes up 0.6 miles per hour each time you upshift. Toyota, I'm not 100% certain what it is, but there is a limitation, especially when you're using the crawl control, which is their downhill descent control in the newer ones. The older ones where they just had downhill descent control, I'm not positive what the different speeds were, or if you can even adjust those. But here's the thing about downhill descent control, okay? We have to trust it. If I'm going downhill and I have my downhill descent control on and I touch my brake, it turns it off. If I touch my throttle, it turns it off, right? All I should be doing is steering input unless I need to override it, right? Maybe I'm sliding, so I accelerate. What happens a lot of times now when we release the brake or throttle, it will re-engage, but there's a moment of freewheel before it catches and re-engages. Normally, if we hit the brake and turn it off, then we let off, we get that freewheel before it engages, then it engages, but we're already pressing the brake again or right at pressing the brake. So it's a lot of back and forth. I really tell people to trust it when you use it, right? Trust it when you use it. So hopefully that kind of clears it up a little bit. Oh yeah, Keith Weber, Weber Off-Road. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, so if while we're at Trail Fest or if you are on your way into Trail Fest, Keith is 30 minutes from Uwharrie, Weber Off-Road and Diesel Performance. They do repairs. They also keep stuff on hand. And maybe we might even get to see Keith at Trail Fest. But they have awesome mechanics there. They also have a bunch of gear. If you need recovery gear or anything like that, you forget your fire extinguisher, right? Or you need to get a battery tie down or something like that, stop at their shop. They will be able to help you out. Thanks for sharing that, Keith. Norman, trust me when I say if you are wheeling with Mike and using a locker when you shouldn't, he can tell. He will call you out on it. That's right. I will call you out, right? I will call you out in a heartbeat. So, all right. Just picking, Norman, just picking. All right. So, hopefully, again, Nicole, that kind of answers your question about downhill descent control. All right. Let's talk about limited slips, okay? Because limited slips um, aren't as common anymore, but we're still seeing them some and older vehicles, especially, right? And some limited slips are awesome, right? You hear about the old uh, Explorer axles with the limited slips in them, some of the old Jeep axles with limited slips, they do great. Exactly like the name says, right? Exactly like the name says. You have a mechanism inside the differentials. Normally it's on the rear, but some have them on the front. The rear differential has a mechanism that as one tire is spinning more than the others, it's a mechanical deal inside, whether it's clutches or worm gears or whatever, where it starts to add resistance to this side, not at the brakes, it does it inside the differential so that it starts to transfer power over to the tire that has traction. Again, the key with this is we have to let the tire spin, okay? And a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, limited slip will not 100% overcome. Say you have a tire in the air and another tire on the ground, it's not going to overcome that 100%, right? So limited slips are not as effective as traction control. They're also not as effective as lockers, but they can be sometimes efficient and cheaper way to get some traction control on your vehicle. Some limited slips, however, are incredibly efficient. Take, for example, they use it on the Ford Raptors, right? I know the first gen Ford Raptors and maybe even the second gens, the front discs were what they called a torsion limited slip. And it was done with worm gears on the inside. Same limited slip, I believe, that was in the Humvees. Uh, Incredibly efficient, right? And will almost overcome 100% open differential. But again, the key is you got to let those tires turn. If you let off, a lot of times that limited slip will release whatever tension it was building up. So we have to keep those tires spinning. And sometimes we have to let them eat a little bit, right? Even though we don't want to cause trail damage. But if we don't want to get stuck, we do have to let them eat a little bit. Best thing to do, let them spin a little bit. If they help us get through, then we go back and we fix whatever we messed up, whether it was rocks kicked out or a hole dug or whatever on the trail. Then we can continue on. That's limited slips, right? And especially in older vehicles, you're going to see a lot more with limited slips. Most modern day vehicles, if they have traction control on them, then they're not going to have a limited slip in them, right? They're not going to have that limited slip. So, and you'll see like Detroit True Track, I believe, is one, if I get that name right. But that's actually a limited slip that a lot of people put in their front differential so that they don't have to put a full locker in it. But again, it's non-selectable. So, you know, it engages kind of the same mechanism that engages, say, as like a Detroit uh, locker would, where it's got to sense that slippage to engage. So that's limited slips. And just to rehash, so we've talked about electronic traction control, we've talked about limited slips, and we've talked about all the different lockers out there, right? All the different lockers out there. But you guys, as the driver, have some built-in traction control, right? You have built-in traction control that when done correctly, is just as good as any one of these I've named. I've seen guys who are really good at this that never even need lockers, okay? And it's called 2-foot driving or left foot braking, okay? If my hands are my feet, right? This is my throttle and this is my brake here. We set our throttle, okay, at a desired RPM for the obstacle. We move using the brake. Okay, we manipulate the brake to move, never coming all the way off on the obstacle. We're dragging the brake through the obstacle. Okay, sometimes more, sometimes less. But by dragging that brake, we're applying brakes to all four tires, right? Applying brakes to all four tires, equalizing the resistance to all four tires. How do differentials work? Differentiate power based on the path of least resistance. If all four tires have equal resistance, guess what? Differentials send an equal power to all four tires. So we can drag that brake and work really well. Okay. Even for the longest time, I didn't have vehicles with lockers. My Land Cruiser is probably one of the first times I've, not the first, but close, that I've had a vehicle that was locked front and rear. So a lot of times I use left foot braking to get through my obstacles. And left foot braking is a little bit more aggressive, so only use it on obstacles. Don't necessarily use it on everyday driving, right? Don't use it on everyday driving. So be careful with that, okay? Because it is heating up the brakes, wearing the brakes, and it does heat up the transmission. I only do 2-foot driving in 4-wheel drive low range. I don't ever do it in 4-wheel drive high range. If I get to an obstacle I need it on in 4 high, I shift to 4 low. But that left foot braking can help out a ton, and you're going to find you have a ton more control on newer vehicles that have the drive-by-wire type throttles, right, where there's no cable in between anymore. So that is your built-in traction control. I love left foot braking or 2-foot driving, and I teach a lot of it. But one downside to it is with modern vehicles is they have the dead pedal sensor, what they call, or we call it the dead pedal sensor. If you're too hard on the brake and too hard on the throttle, it'll cut out the throttle on you. This is kind of from the old Prius days where the throttles were getting stuck under floor mats and people were stomping the brake, but they couldn't stop. This is a safety feature, and some newer vehicles have this, so we have to really finesse it, right? We can't get super aggressive with it. So keep that in mind, right? Keep that in mind with your left foot braking. All right, guys. So looking here to see if we have any questions, and if you guys have any questions, go ahead and throw it up in the comments here. If you have any questions about differentials and traction control systems, I'm just going to double check to make sure that I did not miss one through here. Looks good, right? Looks good. Ooh, we got Jen Wheat from Wheats Off Road in the chat. Dan, 2-foot driving is a little difficult with a stick. Won't get too in depth with it. I prefer driving with a manual transmission, and I like left foot braking with a manual because once we let off that clutch and we get moving, right, we can drag that brake a little bit. And like your Rubicons and stuff like that are really low geared in that transfer case, you can barely stall them in first gear, right? So left foot braking, you can do it, but it is harder with a manual transmission. Definitely harder with a manual transmission. Yes, yeah, Wendy does a good job. Wendy, right, our communications director, she had a birthday this week. So huge shout out to Wendy. But she drives a 2-door JK, and on her windshield banner it says clutch. So so yeah, she does a good job. Yeah. Yeah, Carson, the aux locker is now, it's actually the same locker across the board. You actually change the diff cover, which I thought was really cool. So there's a fork in there on the diff cover, and that fork can be controlled by air, electric, or a cable, which I thought was the coolest thing ever. And I was like, man, that's got to be so smart. Why didn't I think of that, right? Probably because I'm not a differential guy. All right, guys. So while I'm waiting to see if any questions pop up, scrolling right now down at the bottom, huge shout out to BFG. They have been extremely good to Southern 4-Wheel Drive Association. Again, 2 sets of tires for Trail Fest. 2 sets of tires. I mean, that's awesome to give us those to raffle off at Trail Fest. The only way you can win is to come to Trail Fest. That's the only way, right? And who doesn't need some 37-inch tires? Okay, who does not need some 37-inch tires? And rumor has it, chances are high to win this year. But guys, send a message to our business sponsors like BFG, and make sure that you are sending your business to our business sponsors. Again, we can't do what we do without all you guys and our business members. Make sure I didn't miss any questions here. Doesn't look like I did. Yeah, Off-Road Communications LLC. Yeah, make sure you have your radios for Trail Fest. Thank you, Bo. Our wonderful president here, Bo Rosa, joining us in the chat. Dan, the electronic trash control takes the fun out of wheeling for me. It does a little bit, right? I could get on my soapbox. I'll get on my soapbox for a little bit, but this trash control and these vehicles that are being built now are super capable, and they are allowing people to not have to be drivers until they need to be drivers, right? We are seeing more and more people getting stranded on the trails because they're relying on systems like lockers and trash control and fancy suspensions and not driver input, right? Nicole, could I fit 37s on my XJ with no lift? You can, but you're going to need a big Sawzall, right? Yep, big Sawzall. I got you covered. We'll do it at Trail Fest. I'll bring the Sawzall and the blades. You bring the 37s and the XJ. We're ready to go. Those things are like beer cans, right? You can just cut them open. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining in. I didn't even get a chance to see how many people we had on the stream tonight. I see we got like 28 right now, somewhere around there, across all of our different channels, right? But most importantly, guys, to support Southern Four-Wheel Drive Association, like, share, comment as much as you can. Tell your mom, tell your dad, tell your brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, grandpa, grandma. I don't care. Tell your kids if you got kids. I make my kids hear all about this. Tell your dog's hairdresser, your dentist, your doctor. Tell everybody about Southern Four-Wheel Drive Association. We need your guys' support just as much as the trails need our support, right? But thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for the questions. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week, both at Trail Fest and on Tuesday at our next TechNet. I don't know what topic we're going to cover yet. I don't know if I will start recovery yet, but I might. So look forward to seeing what you guys have. And if you have a specific TechNet you want to hear about, or want to know more about a specific subject, send a message to us over on Southern Four-Wheel Drive Association's Facebook page, and I'll do my best. Maybe we can even get some industry experts in here to help us out. So awesome, guys. Thank you so much. And get out, find some adventure. Be safe. Bye.